I work in the Department of Curriculum and Teaching within the School of Ed here at Hunter. And so I teach courses in educational leadership for aspiring principals and aspiring superintendents. And I come to this role as a former special education teacher, administrator of an alternative high school in District 75, and principal of a pre-K through 8 community school. And so when I left that role, after being named Principal of the Year, I carried with me such a deep conviction that every success we achieved was rooted in the work of social emotional learning. And it shaped not only how we taught, but how I led, how we listened, and how we really cared for one another. And so I have the honor and privilege of serving as the director of CSEL, the Collaborative for Social Emotional Learning and Leading here at Hunter. And alongside Julianne, the program manager, we have this beautiful opportunity to support school leaders and educators across the city in strengthening school culture and climate through what we call belonging councils. And these are spaces where adults practice the very skills that we're going to share with you all today, and hoping to cultivate those skills also in students. We also partner with faculty and staff here at Hunter College, particularly in the School of Education, where we help professors engage in contemplative practices as acts of resistance, what it means to slow down, to listen deeply, and to begin to realign our teaching with purpose and empathy. And so through this work, our CSEL fellows have an opportunity to redesign syllabi, programs, to really build belonging from the inside out. And they work on developing transformative change projects that address these inner and outer conditions. I'll throw in the chat in just a minute some of their beautiful work that the fellows did, the themes that came up from inner and outer. But I just want to take a moment to just express deep gratitude to Gina, who is a CSEL alumna, and where she embodies this work in her role at ACERT. And so just thank you for giving us the space to talk about the work that we do at CSEL. And so we hope that you have a chance to experience many of the offerings that we have at CSEL. In a nutshell, our work centers on building belonging from the inside out by connecting heart, habits, structures to make community possible. And so fellows like Gina are learners and leaders in what we call inner and outer transformation. So why does this matter? So at Hunter College, and particularly within the School of Ed, where I have a chance to work, this is an opportunity to nourish ourselves, right? To nourish ourselves within community and to begin to have these deeper conversations of how do we begin to do that? How do we begin to resource? What does that look like in today's climate? And so too often we are caretakers. We give to students, to colleagues, our institutions, without replenishing our own well. And sometimes we forget where we even begin. And so our gatherings are an invitation to pause, to reconnect with the why, and to remember that we were not meant to do this work alone. And so when we begin to privilege intellect over embodiment, productivity over presence, we begin to be in disconnection with ourselves and from others. And so this book that we'll talk about today, Conscious Communication, is a key mentor text in our work along this journey. It helps us, it gives language to what it means to embody this relational way that we can begin to practice our leadership. And it reminds us that connection, it's not just about an exchange of words, but what it means to be shared together in purpose. And so I just want to highlight 2 key points from the book before we get started. And this particular text, Conscious Communication, it reminds us that communication begins with self-awareness, how we understand our patterns, how we understand our triggers and tell our stories, that it's about consciousness. And communication is not simply just a cognitive act, it is how it lives in the body. And it is through breath, it is through gesture, it's through our attention to our bodily sensations that we begin to be really present. And so it's with great pleasure that I get to introduce you to Sarah Suatoni in just a moment. She is the author of this beautifully written book that is deeply resonant with me and a dear friend of mine. And in my work as principal, Sarah was an anchor for me in my school. She supported us in this deep work of communication that is embodied, the kind of work that asks us to listen with our whole self. And what I love about Sarah's approach is that we learn through movement, we learn through relationship. We don't just talk about communication, we get to practice it. And we get to pause, breathe, and respond rather than react. And so in my particular context, as a school leader, our results were powerful. Yes, we did see higher student attendance, but that was because student culture follows staff culture. So that's where we started. We did see our test scores doubled, but that's because we know that emotions drive cognition. We saw greater staff retention, but that's because people stayed because they felt seen, supported, and connected. And so the best outcomes that we experienced were not the ones that I can quantify on paper. They were the ways that we showed up in those everyday moments, how I led every parent meeting, every PTA meeting, how the IEP meetings shifted the tenor of the classroom in the school, how we talked to and about students, but most importantly, how we held one another in both joy and challenge. And this text allows us to do that work really well in any institution. So without further ado, please join me in warmly welcoming Sarah Suatoni.
Wow, thank you. And hearts and bubbles. Okay, so it's amazing to be with all of you during your lunch. I love, first of all, that this is happening, and just want to acknowledge you, Christina and Gina, for the efforts, because I'll tell you a little bit how I came to be here. But before I do, I think that one of the things that we often miss in the space of education is how to care for ourselves and each other, right? There's such a focus on how to care for the student, how to care for the community. And both through this fellowship that Jeneca has created and is sharing with through CCEL, and through this experience, I see the roots of the beginning of actually faculty coming together to care for each other, some internal care. So inside out, meaning not just inside myself, but inside of our learning institutions, that we take responsibility for caring for ourselves and each other. So I just want to acknowledge all of you for taking time during your lunch to show up here, and for all three of you, Jeneca, Gina, Christina, for creating a space for that to happen. And then I'll tell you a little how I came to be here, which is really in, I think, some very backdoor ways. I am part of the faculty at Columbia University Teachers College, where I teach a class called Self-Awareness Training, which in and of itself is unusual. But the person who started the Summer Principals Academy, which educates teachers and other school leaders into principalship, started that program with the belief that self-care and self-awareness were the foundation for powerful leadership and being a powerful educator. So I get the opportunity to teach that course each year, and also the opportunity to be part of a higher ed faculty, and so then get to see both the ways that we can support each other within that and the ways that we don't. And so this book, Conscious Communication, and our work at my the company that I co-lead with my partner David Yuan, are both anchored in a deep devotion to this idea that we can make practical these really challenging everyday skills of social and emotional learning and communication, that those can be made practical and usable, that in fact, just take a moment and think to yourself, was there a class in your high school or or at any point in your career on how to communicate about challenging conversations in a way that was personal and embodied? Was there a class really in how to name and notice your feelings? It seems that we do a ton of educating in STEM, but we don't do a lot of educating about how to be human. And so that's really where my work is anchored. And my background is in first in movement. I started my professional life as a dancer, modern dancer, and why our work is embodied is because of the learning I had in those early days of my career. Then, as I've spent years as a marriage and family therapist, working in the space of healing, particularly mind-body related illnesses, um, trauma-based illnesses, and then as a marriage and family therapist, spending a lot of time on helping people learn how to communicate in moments of stress and challenge. So those are the roots of the work. And I'm going to take just a little bit of time to anchor the work by sharing a slide deck here, just so you all feel I'm doing this really mostly as a way of creating a sense of trust between us, that you feel like this isn't just rooted um, in my personal ideas, but actually in quite a lot of experience and theory, which I think is important as academics for us to remember, to have that anchor point. So this is the company that I run with David Yuan. It's called Awareness in Motion, and we're a leadership development company. And we work in the space of education mostly, but also we work with the NYPD and with other organizations that need support anchored in social and emotional learning and conscious communication. And here are the roots. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about these, but I just wanted to offer a nod to the people and the theory and the research that is what we stand on at Awareness in Motion, which is first of all anchored in the work of emotional intelligence, this work that's been done for several decades now, and yet is still really challenging for us to get our arms wrapped around and make into everyday action. This work of knowing that, as Jeneca mentioned, how we feel, our ability to know our feelings, name them, regulate them, and express them is the foundation of all learning and the foundation of relationship. Also, the work of mindfulness, which is this ability to be able to be present in any given moment in our neocortical brain, calm and non-judgmental, so that we can bring a learner mindset to the way we show up. This work of somatic awareness is this ability to know that mindfulness and emotional intelligence begins in the body. And then finally, these ideas of bringing alignment to our values, our purpose, and our actions, and the idea that this is always a practice. It's never a perfect. We never we never really come to full mastery of these principles. These are ones that we come back to it with a state of humility and practice over and over again. And we practice it through being willing to be in relationship, through dialogue. And that's, I think, the anchor point for today's conversation is how do we do dialogue? How do we do communication in a way that's mindful, emotionally intelligent, that aligns with our principles and our values and is embodied? So I did want to make a case for the research showing how important this is, right? That conscious communication increases our sense of belonging. And so the work of C-Cell anchored in belonging and the work of conscious communication are partners. That when we have a greater sense of belonging, there's higher academic performance, there's more of an ability to persist in challenging moments, and there's greater mental health markers. And in today's world where we're in a mental health crisis, this becomes even more important. That there's actually a correlation between lack of belonging and anxiety in particular, and depression. And that there's a correlation in schools between lack of belonging and attendance, lower grades, and disciplinary problems. In some ways, this feels like stating the obvious, and yet it needs to be said, because I think that that we all know this, all of these data, these points can land as one more way that we're failing unless we're given some tools for how to do it differently. And so what I was wanting to do when I wrote Conscious Communication was ask, how do I have the self-awareness to be able to communicate? And then how do I break it down into really simple everyday steps? And so I wanted to just do a mention of this very essential foundational premise, which is that psychological safety, this acknowledgement that until I have some sense of and a willingness to be in the practice of trying to create psychological safety, I can't have courageous and conscious conversations as easily. And so Amy Edmondson out of Harvard did this research in which she established that this was the highest marker of success in teamwork. And I would suggest that we could extend that to the space of education, that when we can create a climate in which people are comfortable being and expressing themselves, we can then be able to have courageous, conscious, authentic conversation. And so we could spend the whole rest of our conversation together talking about this. How do I establish psychological safety in my classroom? How do I do it on the teams and the administrative teams I sit in and work in? But for today, I wanted to move right into the four basics of conscious communication, which are that we learn how to ground and center. We're going to talk a little bit more about what I mean and experience that together. That we practice sharing authentically, or what we call embodied speaking. That we also practice learning how to listen fully, which we call embodied listening. And finally, we bring a learner mindset to the way that we communicate by developing ways of bringing ourselves back into curiosity and using open-ended questions at the beginning stages of our communication. Communication is, of course, an arc, and at certain moments we move into convergent thinking, we move into decision making, we move into problem solving, we move into, in the case of a student-teacher relationship, perhaps advice giving or accountability. But we begin with these steps: grounding, authentic sharing, listening fully, and asking open-ended questions. And so I wanted to begin that by offering you all an experience of grounding. And so we named this grounding process a pause. And by pause, we've used this acronym, paying attention, using our somatic experience, and soma means body, using our embodied experience, because in fact, there's other ways that we pause. We can pause and scroll. And, just think for a moment how often you do that. You take a pause and you scroll. You can pause. One of my favorite is and watch Netflix. And that, in fact, is a pause, but it's not a mindful pause. So this way of pausing is one in which you access moments when you step away from the frantic pace, from the problem solving, from the to-do list, long enough to ground and center in your body. And so before we engage in this, take a moment to, if you would, and just pop into the chat before we experience the pause I'm going to offer. What are the ways that you are currently do pause? Perhaps you knit or you sing in your car. Maybe cooking is the way that you really connect mind and body in this peaceful, mindful way. And I would just love to get the pulse on the group. Maybe you read. What are your ways of pausing? I'll give you a moment to type one of those into the chat so that we can also start learning from each other. Beautiful. I'm going to read these out loud. So from Darlene, we have listen to music. Such a powerful one. Go for a walk, Brooke says, edit photos. Jeneca, yoga, writing poetry, collaging. Making espresso in the morning, I love that. That is such a when I took my first mindfulness course, they actually invited you to mindfully make coffee. Love that. Thank you. Doodle and draw. Jamie, I wanted to mention there's an amazing book. Someone can put it in the chat. Doodle, tinker, dabble, try. I just was listening to a podcast with the author speaking, and he makes the point that there's two kinds of pause: a focused pause, like mindfulness, and an unfocused pause, where you tap into the part of your brain that thinks more expansively and creatively. This is kind of the work of saying, "Oh, my great ideas come in when I'm in the shower." So doodling, drawing, collaging, these are ways of giving yourself a brain break. But it's embodied. It's still an embodied practice. Hiking, cooking, reading, scrolling, gardening, listening to music, going for a walk, stretching. Okay, amazing. So I'm going to offer you the simplest of pauses where we move from this idea of being in a fight, flight, freeze response into our prefrontal cortex, into the space of our brain that's at the front where we can think creatively and empathically, critically as well. So we call this practice pause, feel, choose. And so I'm going to invite you into what is going to be about a 2 to 3 minute guided practice, and you can choose to modify every single part of what I say in any way that works for you. These are simply guidelines. But let's begin by bringing your feet to the ground if you can. And this, an active, conscious way of just feeling the ground beneath you or feeling your hips in the chair. So literally give your body that signal: I'm supported in this moment. And then from there, root down by pressing into your feet or your hips, your sit bones on the chair. Root down just enough to rise up through your spine, like a plant growing. Just put a little space between your vertebrae, sitting up straight and tall, so that you open up the spaces in your body, the ribs, the lungs that breathe. And give yourself a full deep breath to support that open alignment. And with your next few breaths, see if you can feel the way your body expands and opens and inflates as you inhale, energizes. And with the exhale, scan your body for tension. Though I've invited you to sit up straight and tall, see if you can balance that effort with ease. Use the exhale to release, relax, and let go. So each inhale, a chance to lengthen, lift, expand, energize. Each exhale connects to the parasympathetic nervous system, helping you calm down. Now, taking a moment to shift your awareness from feeling your breath to noticing any sensations that are present right now. You might notice some tingling or tension, jitteriness, warmth. Just simply notice and name these sensations without judgment. And as you notice, consider the idea that sensations are the gateway into how you feel. Asking yourself now, how am I feeling? What is the emotional landscape I'm experiencing right now? What is my internal weather? See if you can name that weather with a word or a phrase. It might be an emotion word like happy or sad. It might be a weather pattern like foggy or sunny. Maybe a color, a mood. Take a moment once you've named how you feel to recognize you can't always change how you feel, but you can choose your response. Ask yourself, what is an attitude I'd like to bring to this moment? This might be a word like kind or patient, open or curious. Name your intention. Taking just one more moment to review, how am I feeling? What is my intention? And then go ahead and open your eyes. And if you feel willing, pop into the chat how you're feeling and your intention for this moment so that we can again begin to build a sense of awareness of each other. So as you open up your chat and look at how your colleagues are showing up, just consider the idea of what would it be to know this about your students as you started a class, or know this about your colleagues as you started a meeting, knowing that folks are in a calm and open place, or perhaps in a foggy place, or very anxious and jittery. These kinds of pieces of information we often skip. And they are the foundation of being able to communicate. And so I'm going to move on from this practice into a communication practice grounded in sharing how we feel. And so I wanted to establish, why do we start with feelings? Can you go ahead and give me a thumbs up, either using your emojis or just, bring yourself off screen and just thumbs up if you were raised in a culture or in a work culture, a family culture, where you were taught to leave your feelings at the door, or not share your business, or something like children should be seen and not heard. Um, if those are messages that you bring to work, I see some thumbs going up, it makes it hard to hear that sharing your feelings is a good idea, right? Now here you are, a professional, and but the fact is that emotions are our core motivators and they inform our actions, whether we know it or not. And so the basis of therapy, psychological work, all those years ago when it was started, was that unexamined and unexpressed emotions derail our behavior, and they derail our communication. So we start this work with feelings because they are the foundation of our actions. And this work of Helen Immerdino Yang, that if you haven't read her book on the relationship between emotions and the neurobiological research she does on how emotions act in the body, her work is powerful. And I just wanted to share this quote that she shares. It's literally neurobiologically impossible to build memories, engage in complex thought, or make meaningful decisions without emotion. So they're there. And how we relate to them is key, not just to our communication and our relationship building, but to our learning. And so I'm going to ask you all to take just about 3 minutes to reflect now. And if you'd like to, you can journal if you've brought pen and paper, or just simply sit in reflection with this journaling prompt. And we're going to use this journaling prompt, just so you know, to engage in a conversation where we practice embodied speaking and embodied listening and curiosity, those three key pillars. So we're going to practice being calm, which we just did, then being embodied speaker, embodied listener, and using curiosity. But I'll pause here and give you 3 minutes to just journal about this question. What happens inside of me when I try to share my feelings and needs, when others share theirs? What internal beliefs, childhood, and cultural messages influence this experience? Go ahead and take a moment to journal. So Simone Weil, who is a writer of spiritual writers, or I should say a religious historian, wrote, attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. And so this practice of embodied listening is a practice of simply listening fully, head and heart open. So really noticing the way that you're sitting. And just to make that point really clear, I'll do the next parts of this slide with my body closed so that you can feel, what does it feel like to listen to somebody, hopefully you can see me, who's not open. And just notice the shift that happened in your own body when I close off my body. And so that shift, I'm going to open back up, actually matters to the listening. So again, the practice of listening begins with the body. I'm listening with my heart, my face, my breath. Also paying attention to the body language of the speaker, listening without judgment. And here's the key: listening to our own impulses, signals, and reality as we listen to them, but not judging, advice giving, agreeing, or oops, sorry guys, just lost my agreeing, just simply listening. At the end of the listening period, which in the case of your practice session will be 3-4 minutes, you could invite in an open-ended question, something that shares that you've heard them and that you're curious about them. An open-ended question begins with what, who, how, why, not a yes/no question. So here are the directions. I think we'll probably be in rooms of 2 because of time, but if we may have an uneven number, there may be a trio. If there's a trio, there's an observer. The speaker will share about what you journaled. Using I statements, share what are your obstacles to sharing about your feelings and needs, or hearing others share about theirs. What is the challenging for you about that? The listener will use embodied listening, simply listening, without advice giving, inserting opinions. Doesn't mean that you have to be a robot. Certainly you can express yourself with your face, with your body, but simply giving space to be witnessed and heard. And then at the end, ask an open-ended question. In a normal setting, that open-ended question would be an invitation to deepen the dialogue. For today's purposes, we won't deepen the dialogue. After the open-ended question, we'll allow that person to just simply take it in, and then we'll switch roles. So you'll be together in the breakout room for a full 10 minutes, giving us 10 minutes to come back. Is that right, Christina and Gina? We do end at 1. Just double check. Okay. Giving us we'll be in there for 9 minutes, giving us 10 minutes to come back and have question, answer, and open conversation. So you have about 4 minutes and we'll send you a message. You should be switching pairs now. And I'm going to repeat, or actually maybe somebody from one of you from the audience could unmute and just repeat those directions so that I'm sure we're all on the same page about what's happening in the breakout room.
I can do so.
Thank you.
So the speaker is going to share obstacles as I statements. The listener will use embodied listening and just listen. And the observer will notice how it feels and offer feedback.
Thanks, Gina. And the topic is the one that you just journaled about. Great. So in a moment, you'll get invitations to these breakout rooms. I do recommend that ideally you come on screen. I know all of you are eating lunch and it can feel, but if you're comfortable coming onto screen, it's easier to do this embodied listening on screen. All right, we'll be back at 10 to noon, 10 to 1. Christina, should I join a breakout room? Did you put me with somebody? I'm gonna invite you into the chat just to share. Or you can, we'll also ask you to unmute and share, but take a moment if you'd like to chat in. What are your insights or takeaways based on that experience of practicing embodied listening, practicing embodied speaking, open-ended questions, and also the topic of sharing, what is it like to share my feelings and needs? What are my obstacles? So take a moment to chat into the chat, your insights or questions about any or all of that. Jeneca's put that prompt in a summarized way into the chats in case you want that. And I'll give you a moment to chat in, and then we can have some conversation about what you've shared. So powerful stuff already. So I am wondering if we could have you one at a time unmute and just share a little more about your thoughts and questions based on what you've written here or what else is emerging. And let's start with the first person who got their chat in, which is Brooke, if you're willing. And if you want to pass, feel free.
I can go. That's fine. Yeah, I just thought it was a really interesting experience to, you could see there's some deep thoughts that were, deep and personal thoughts that we reflected on, and to kind of open up in this room, this space that's, I didn't know either of the people from past experiences or exchanges. So to kind of open up was I felt almost vulnerable. Um, but it was good, and I enjoyed the framework of having the different roles and then being able to discuss and kind of hear the observation of that. So thank you for this.
You're so welcome. Thank you for naming that it felt vulnerable, and just inviting all of the rest of you, whether you're on screen or not, to just give a thumbs up if that was part of the experience for you. And just acknowledging that, right? That in fact, this work of conscious communication is vulnerable, and it's actually part of the power is that when we can be authentic and vulnerable and real with each other, it invites more empathy and it deflates defensiveness in the conversation. So thanks, Brooke, for highlighting that and sharing how it was for you. Gina, you want to unmute and share your experience? I see that you put something in the chat.
Yeah, I always feel so lucky to work in the environment that I do, but I felt super lucky today. It felt almost natural to be vulnerable in that space, so it was very, very, very lovely.
Yeah, thanks for bringing in the gratitude. Valerie, I love what you're sharing here about just this naming the challenge of being virtual. So you want to share anything more, questions or comments about that?
It just in some ways felt unnatural because I couldn't reach out in response to what I was hearing. And all I could do was just be there and listen. And I'm used to doing that in the physical world, but it's much harder for me, at least, to do that in the Zoom world. And so it was a interesting experience, kind of like pulling myself back from jumping in and saying something, because I didn't have the touch aspect that I would have otherwise used in the real world.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for naming that. I see a lot of head nodding going on. And I think that, those of us who work in the therapy space and moved into virtual sessions during the pandemic and have never moved back out for many clients, it's a practice, right? It's actually a piece, probably in the revised edition of Conscious Communication, how to transmit and communicate care using body language through the screen is an absolutely essential skill, right? Thank you for naming it. We have a couple more comments in here, so I want to quickly just invite Veshno, I hope I've said your name correctly, to share what you wrote here. It's beautiful.
Yes, you did. Thank you, Sarah. So I was partnered with Jamie. I did have the pleasure of knowing Jamie already through the CSOL Fellowship. But one of the pieces that really resonated for me was, and part of my response was just reflecting on that. Sometimes when people share how they feel with you, for me, there's an urge to like help them solve that problem and find a solution. And so knowing that I can sit with someone and receive what they're saying and just be there for them physically, and be an ear for them without necessarily having to solve the issue for them. It was very therapeutic. And then just connecting with Jamie on a lot of the ways that we felt, it was very nice.
Thank you. And Jamie, thank you also for naming that it felt validating to partner. So I love that you two both shared. So we get to hear what that experience was like from both ends. And I just want to appreciate your acknowledgement that it's therapeutic both to be the listener in that situation and have the experience that I don't have to solve this, right? This, I think, is a fundamental experience for educators and administrators, is that we're so often in the role of, I have to solve this. And what if I don't? What if the person I'm listening to gets to just be witnessed and be the person who solves their own challenge? So love that you named that. We have only 3 minutes left, and I know Jeneca wants to have some time. So I feel like we could now again have a whole hour-long conversation based on this rich dialogue, but I'm going to hand it over to you, Jeneca. And then I'm also going to let you know that you'll get the slide deck. And in the slide deck is a QR code to the book. So you're welcome to, I'll pop it up here at the very end in case you want to grab it now. But if you want to access the book yourself, we'll make that available.
Beautiful. Well, I just want to take a moment to thank ACERT, both Gina and Christina, for hosting this session and for continuously creating spaces where we can learn, reflect, and grow together, just across the community. And a huge thank you to Sarah for your wisdom and for offering us such a powerful framework and tool. Pause, feel, and choose. Reminding us that conscious communication, it ultimately begins in the body, and that extends to how we show up for one another, as we so beautifully heard in the chat. And lastly, just a big thank you to each and every one of you for showing up today as your most authentic self, leaning into vulnerability and just practicing embodied listening and speaking, reminding ourselves that this is a practice and we can make that choice to continue to engage in these small, profound acts, these moments of choice. We can make these choices in our classrooms, in our offices. We continue to make that choice. And so if today's session resonated with you, I'm just going to echo Sarah. We encourage you to consider purchasing the book. It offers many tools. What I love about it is you actually get to hear Sarah's voice throughout with the QR codes. And so there's beautiful ways that you can stay connected in this. And if you'd like to learn more about CSEL, I will put that in the chat. It's our website and a way to email us to stay connected. We have a variety of upcoming fellowship opportunities. We're going to be expanding our fellowship opportunities this year for Hunter College faculty and staff. And so if moments like this really interest you, we would love for you to be a fellow as we roll out our work. I'm also going to put in the chat, we have an upcoming screening of the documentary Join or Die on October 29th from 1 to 3 in the Glass Cafe. And this film explores the decline of community participation and its impact on democracy. And it really highlights what Valerie was talking about, the importance of connection, and particularly in-person connection through groups and organizations, and how we are going to get through this, move forward, is as community, as being there for one another through belonging, through empathy, our shared purpose, as really the heart of what holds communities together. So we are excited with our upcoming offerings that we will have for you. And we just ask that you continue creating spaces of care, connection, and belonging. And we would love to be right beside you as you engage in these endeavors.